Okay, thank you. The recording has started. Okay, so Merry Christmas to you again. I see we have 11 people against the 20 people we had last week. Perhaps we need to conduct a small census to be very sure how many students we have so that we know how to manage the class considering the numbers we get at any point in time. Okay, so just some cleanup information. Last week, I shared the, how do you call it? I shared a course manual for the program. I want you to give me a short feedback about how you are finding engaging with the course manual. Vis-a-vis the content I'm giving you through the audio and then the slides. And then I'll be very happy for any questions from the content you engage with from Unit 1. So can I get any feedback from that? So one, how you're finding the course manual vis-a-vis the content I'm delivering online, and two, any questions you have from last week very quickly. Today I'm going to move a little bit faster than we did last week. Are there any outstanding issues we need clarity on? Okay, good. So if there are no outstanding issues, I'll just share the slides. Apologies. Okay, please, can you confirm if you can see the slides?
Yes, please, we can.
Okay. Very good. Okay, this one was too much. Okay, so I realized that whilst I'm teaching, a lot of you want to ask questions, and I can't see when someone raises their hand or makes a comment. So the last week I asked for the nomination of a course rep. You were able to come up with anyone? Were you able to come up with a course rep? No, I suppose the silence means no. Okay, so can we do it this way? Can we appoint anyone to draw my attention when anyone consistently raises their hand or raises a question that cannot be ignored to the end of the session? Today we are going to move all the questions to the end of the session, but there may be some pending issues that need clarity before we move on. So can anyone draw my attention when any of such issues come up? We can just start talking or something.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So unit 2. Last week we spent a lot of time trying to engage with the name African traditional religion. So what are the kind of discussions and arguments that come up when we couple the three aspects of the name African traditional religion? We came up with a lot of interesting discussions. Then we moved on to look at the various basic terms, it's membership in African traditional religion, the development of African traditional religion. And we also understood that African traditional religion is an oral religion. Over the ages, over the centuries, African traditional religion, like most indigenous religion, has always been a religion passed down by word of mouth and memory. And because the religion was mostly never written down, it was very difficult for anyone who was fascinated by the religion and wanted to study the religion to even begin to start any study of it, because there was nothing to start reading. That was why we came about the 5 methods of study, the main methods, about 5 of them for studying the religion. Then we also agreed on the final one, the phenomenological approach to the study of religion. We agreed that that is probably the most popular and the most effective approach to studying the religion. Why? Because for this type of religion, it encourages researchers to go and engage with the lived experiences, to go and engage with the rituals of the people in order to come up with findings which reports accurately about the religion. That is what we ended with. Now, today we are moving further from that. We look at what we call the sources of African traditional religion. So the session helps to, by the end of the session, be able to understand the various sources of the religion. When you say source of information, where does the scholar, where does the student of religion gain any kind of information he or she wants to obtain in order to understand indigenous religions, including African traditional religion? So we look at the primary and secondary, and for this particular session, we look at myths and proverbs as primary sources of African traditional religion. So straight to the first slide. We agreed, again, from the previous unit, we agreed that indigenous religions, as compared to the more textual religions, is oral in nature. So let's compare African traditional religion to Christianity. African traditional religion doesn't have any scriptures. Christianity has the Bible. ATL, let's compare it to Hinduism, the religion of the Indians. They have the Vedas for the Hindus, they have the Upanishads, they have Agamas. They also have the Bhagavad Gita. They have the Jesus. As for example, the Bhagavad Gita, African traditional religion doesn't have any written down scriptures. Okay. So even for Hinduism, which is indeed an indigenous religion is a religion that emanates from the natives of a particular land. Okay, so the natives of Ghana are Ghanaians. Therefore, the indigenous religion of Ghanaians can be the Ashanti traditional religion, can be the Ewe traditional religion, etc. So the indigenous religion of the Indians is Hinduism. Now, even Hinduism, which is an indigenous religion, has written scriptures. But African religion does not have written scriptures. I have not come across any written scriptures which is believed to emanate from any particular ethnic group south of the Sahara. Okay, so what does this present to the scholar of religion who tries to understand the way of life of the African traditional person? We need to find innovative ways to be able to study the religion in the absence of scriptures. And that is what we're going to engage with. We refer to the sources of the religion. Okay, so to a large extent, the various methods we mentioned in the previous units, historical method, what do you call it, the unity approach, etc., was as a means to try to overcome the challenge of not having scriptures in the religion. Okay, now, what we also understood was that depending on only oral narratives has always been a challenge. Then the issue of sources of information of media also came up as a way of overcoming the challenges that we have with oral tradition. We can look at 2 particular sources of the religion. We have primary sources and secondary sources. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to give a general introduction about the 2 sources of the religion, primary and secondary. Then we delve deeper into the various examples that we have assigned to this course. Oral sources of African traditional religion. The first source, oral sources. Now, oral sources refer to types of information which are gleaned firsthand, okay, firsthand from the way of life of the African and from the way he practices his religion. Let me go over again. The oral sources of the religion are the types of information we can glean firsthand. We can glean from the primary contact with the believer and then the way he practices the religion. Oral sources are very essential. They're very important because, as we discussed, we don't have written scriptures. So the scholar can only go and engage in ask questions, observe, smell, see, record, and come up with conclusions about how the African observes his or her religion. Okay, so I mean the third point, making an argument that oral sources help the student to get as close to the religion as possible. Of course, if you want to engage with the oral source of information of African traditional religion, you cannot be apart from the way the African practices his or her religion. You need to be immersed, you need to be engaged in the way of life of the African traditional person. This is what we call under the phenomenological approach empathetic interpolation, if you remember very well. Where you empathize with the believer, or you empathize with the lived experience by going to observe, record, analyze, and come up with findings which are very accurate of the way of life of the African traditional person. So oral sources are passed down by word of mouth. Okay, oral sources are passed down by word of mouth. The ear is the receiving organ, and language is what is used to convey information. So examples of oral sources include myths, what engage with these sources individually and try to understand what we can learn from them. Okay, so we have myths, we have proverbs, we have names. Then let's move to non-oral sources. So non-oral sources, or what we call secondary sources, are the type of information that okay, so oral sources will involve oral and non-oral. Non-oral sources are under oral sources, and these are the types of information which we usually see. Example, arts and crafts, artistic expressions, etc. Over here, eye is the receiving organ. So let us not get twisted. Under oral sources, we have oral and non-oral. Okay. Under primary sources, we have oral and non-oral. Oral sources are the type of information that are passed down by the word of mouth. The non-oral sources are the type of information passed down in the form of arts and craft and artistic expressions. That does it with primary sources. So secondary sources of information. The first way to explain secondary sources of information are the types of information that is gleaned from primary sources. Okay, so as I previously explained, we have primary sources, secondary sources, and our primary sources we have oral and non-oral, which enables the scholar to get as close to the believer as possible. And then we now have what we call secondary sources. Now, secondary sources can be understood from primary sources. Without primary sources, you cannot get secondary sources. Okay, for example, can study myths to be able to write a book about myths. So the book written becomes the secondary source from the primary source of myths. All right. So, like I'm explaining the second point, secondary sources are from what do you call the primary source of information. You can go and observe a festival. You can go and write an article about the festival. You can go and observe a naming ceremony and write an article about it. This is written down and retain a secondary source. So I'll briefly and very quickly, I believe, run through the primary sources of formation and the secondary sources. And our primary sources, we have oral and non-oral, and then we have the secondary source of information. The primary sources and the oral sources, we have the type of information that is passed down by word of mouth, okay, and then the ear is the receiving organ, and language is used to convey. Then we also have the non-oral sources, which is in the form of arts and crafts and artistic expressions. For example, on the non-oral sources, we can talk about a class symbols of the Ashantis. The class symbols of the Ashantis is an example of non-oral sources and the primary sources of the religion. Okay, a quick break. Any questions so far?
No, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you. So let's move on. Secondary sources of African traditional religion. Okay, so primary sources, and we have oral sources. Under oral sources, we have myths, proverbs, and names. Myths, proverbs, and names, and we're going to explain them one by one. So myths derive etymologically from the Greek word mythos, which means delivered by the word of mouth. So I believe that by now, from your previous studies, you realize that in disciplines like religion, we are very much interested in the root meaning of words, what we call etymology. So when you begin here, say, if you have knowledge about how a particular central concept, like when you ask to write an essay on myths, it is very helpful to bring the etymology. So this is the etymology, comes from the root meaning, which means delivered by the word of mouth. Okay, so the types of myths, we have cosmogonic myths or Christian myths. These are stories depicting how the world was created. So we the very popular one we have a Christian myth, where we believe that God was very close to human beings, very, very close. Then there was this old woman who used to pound food a lot, and then the person used to hate God, and as a result of that disturbance, God moved away from human beings. Okay, we can look at many other myths. Probably we'll look at some examples from our various backgrounds later. They also have ecological myths. Now, these are myths which attempt to explain how rituals, myths, and customs came about. How rituals, myths, and customs came about. For example, under ecological myths, Sanchez are able to explain why they inherit matrilineally. Now, history suggests that the Ashantis used to be patrilineal. They were patriarchal. They used to inherit from their father's lineage. But there was one chief who fell very sick and asked for anyone in the family to sacrifice in order to save his life. No one came up but a sister who sacrificed one of his sons, her sons. And as a result, the chief, upon getting well, gave a ruling that the Ashanti kingdom should inherit from the matrilineal lineage. That is how the Ashanti kingdom became a matrilineal system. Okay, so these are the kind of stories that explain how particular myths, rituals, and customs come about. They also have eschatological myths. So whenever you get eschatology, you hear about the end time. Okay, so these are myths that deals with what happens after death. Okay, how is the world going to come to an end? And what is the benefits you gain from living a good life, etc. Right? Then historical myths, as the name suggests, it will trace a very clear line about how a particular group of people migrate, about how they settle, about how they develop particular areas of their life. Okay, so these are historical myths. Now, after explaining these kind of myths, we can also understand the kind of information can glean from these myths. So please, whenever you see things from a particular source, like I've written here, things from myths, these are the types of information you can understand from it. So from myths, what are the kind of things we can understand? One, the subservience of God to the God. And the subservience of God to Almighty God. This means that the gods, although are worshipped as gods, derive their supremacy, derive their authenticity from the Almighty Being. In almost every indigenous African culture, you come across the concept of an Almighty Being. My own I can't relate to. We have what's called Onyankopon. I'm sure we have the same concept in Ewe. We have Maui. Okay, in Kobo, we have what we call Church and Maui. Okay, so every ethnic group has the concept of the Almighty Being. However, there are also gods who derive a form of power, who derive supremacy from the Almighty Being. And then over here, we have an example of the Orisa, gods of the Yoruba, who derive supremacy from the Almighty Being. Then, another information you can give from this is that God is distant from human activities because of the activities of humans themselves. So God used to always be close to us. Okay, in some African myths, you get the understanding that as a result of the behavior of man, God had no choice but to distance himself from a human being. So I've explained what we know about that kind of traditional religion, where we had an old woman who used to pound, and as a result of the consistent noise and then the hitting of God, God had to move away. Elsewhere, you also come across, I think in Liberia, among the Mende people of Liberia, you come across a myth that suggests that God used to be very close to the Mende people of Liberia, but as a result of the many requests, human beings used to request too many things from God and became fed up. So he moved away from human beings, but left 2 fowls. Okay, he left 2 fowls on this earth for the many people to be able to communicate with God and also retaliate whenever anyone cares them. So whenever and among the many people now, whenever a person is wrong, the person would best out to say that God, please come down because I have a foul to give to you. All right. So that is one of the ways to show that God is different from human beings because of human activities. So that does it for myths. We look at the types of myths as an oral source. And then we have also looked at the kind of information we can derive from myths. Moving forward. Proverbs. So we are all very familiar with what proverbs are. Over here, I've derived a definition from Mr. Booton. This is an old definition, but it's quite popular in the state of African tradition. It says that proverbs are terse, pithy statements. Okay, they are very short, they are very catchy, but they convey a very interesting information within. Okay, so proverbs have 2 parts. We have the surface or the literal meaning and then the deeper meaning. So the surface meanings are just the literal understandings you can gain from the information. For example, you say a crab doesn't give birth to a bird. That's the literal meaning. But when you go deeper, you can glean deeper understandings of what it means. Okay, deeper meanings can be gleaned from the second part of proverbs in most African cultures. So, like I explained, whenever we talk about themes, we're looking at the information we can get from what kind of information or themes we can glean from proverbs. We can understand the nature of God. 1, we can understand ethical teachings, what is right and wrong. We can also understand philosophy of life, how to live your life. So we're going to look at the kind of information we can glean from each of these 3 areas, each of these 3 things: theology, information about the nature of God and who He is; 2, ethical teachings, what we ought to do and what we ought not to do, what is right or wrong; and then 3, the philosophy of life, in relation to how we have to live our lives. So under theology, and under the theology, we can talk about the nature of God. We can, through prophets, you can somehow understand the spiritual nature of God. Okay, God is a spirit. And there are times to say that okay, if you want to talk to God, speak to the wind. We also understand under theology the nature of God, the moral nature of God. One, God is kind. Okay, God is kind, God is all loving. However, we can also understand that human beings are not to take the kindness of God as a frequent. Also, to understand the moral nature of God, we understand that God hates evil. Okay, God hates evil, and then in the local religions, we understand that God punishes offenders for their bad deeds as well. Okay, and the theme about being appreciative to God also come up under the moral nature itself. God also loves unity. Okay, God loves unity among human beings, and then there's this popular saying that once you are peace with your fellow human being, you warrant blessings from the Almighty Being. Okay, but if you're not at peace with fellow human beings, you warrant curses and indeed ill health from God. Okay, so God loves unity, harmony, and peace among human beings. Then we also understand how God relates with human life. Okay, God and human life relate from what they are from Proverbs. For example, human life is sacred, ordained by God. Therefore, when you take human life, God considers it a very serious sin. Humans cannot avoid destiny. Now, predestination or destiny is a very, very controversial concept in most religions, including African traditional religion, because you can engage with opposites. In one breath, you will find certain ethnic groups suggesting that one cannot avoid his or her destiny. So once, for example, once you are destined to be a teacher, there's nothing you can do, you definitely be a teacher. Then in another breath, you find certain ethnic groups, in fact, in particular ethnic groups, you can find them saying that you cannot avoid your destiny. You can avoid some concepts also suggesting that through hard work and then luck, you can change your destiny. So destiny is a very controversial concept, probably too large for us to explain under this particular course. But through Proverbs, you can understand certain issues about our destiny, that you cannot avoid your destiny. Also through Proverbs, we are able to understand God and the nature of God. Okay, so one basic information is that God shares his nature with the gods. Okay, God shares his nature with the gods. And under this particular information, what you need to understand is that worship is diffused among gods and then the Almighty Being. Worship is diffused from the Almighty God. Worship is diffused from the Almighty God. So, in a particular town, for example, I live in Amina. In Amina here, we have over 90 gods, and these gods are worshipped. Okay, these gods are worshipped. Now, once we worship these gods, it means we are worshiping the Almighty Being, who's God on your own. Okay, so the worship of the gods does not mean that you're not worshiping the Almighty Being. In fact, worshiping the gods suggests that you're worshiping the Almighty Being directly. Okay, so that's also another information you can gain from Proverbs about the nature of God and the gods. We can also gain some information about humans and the gods. Okay, over here, I think this is some information we gleaned earlier, that human beings must show patience with the gods. The gods work at their own pace. Okay, the gods work at their own pace. You cannot dictate for the gods what to do. Okay, then we are coming across this information again, which is very important, that interpersonal relationship between human beings, how you relate socially with fellow human beings, is very important. Okay, then we can also see the God as playing a mediating role. The gods play a mediating role between God and human beings. All right. We can also glean information under Proverbs. We can also, under Proverbs and theology, can also glean information about ancestorship or eschatology. the end times and ancestors. Now, the concept of ancestors is a very dominant theme, very popular theme of the Sahara. I explained last week that when we talk about African traditional religion, we are referring to all parts of Africa except North Africa. So ancestorship can be found right up from Central Africa down to South Africa. And the common theme is that an ancestor has to be someone who has lived a good old life and at least has procreated, has lived it. Then ancestorship, you can also learn that death is not the end of life. Okay, I think this is a thing very common to Christians. There are proverbs which suggest that once you die, it's just the beginning of eternal life. So the life on life is just one piece of the kind of benefits that you can get called the good life. All right. So we've looked at proverbs as theology. I explained that under proverbs, you can look at theology, you can look at ethical teachings, you can look at philosophy of life. So what we've done in the next 3 or 4 slides is look at theology, the types of information you can glean about God and the nature of God. So we are moving to ethical teachings. Okay, what are the kind of information we can glean when we want to understand what we have to do and what we do not have to do? So proverbs convey moral value. Proverbs convey information about and what you do not do, what you have to do. Okay. For example, you have a proverb here: little by little, the bell builds its nest. The moral value here is patience. Okay. There is another proverb here: only the fool gets the depth of water with both feet. Of course, you don't know how deep the river is, so you don't jump into the river to see how deep it is. You try to test its depth. And when you realize that its depth is getting above your knee to your thigh, you know that the river is very deep. Over here, the moral value portion. Then Proverbs also, under Proverbs, so we are done with ethical teaching. Now I'm looking at the philosophy of life. Philosophy of life. How does man have to live his life? How does man or woman? Let me how does man or woman live? How is man or woman supposed to live his or her life? So, for example, it teaches us, Proverbs teaches that life is not the end of a person, as we explained. Then we understand that life does not remain the same. This is similar to the saying that nothing is permanent in life. Okay. You can be rich today, but without poor planning, you can be poor tomorrow. But you can be poor today with a good planning and hard work, you can be rich tomorrow. Okay. And we also have Proverbs suggests that humble beginnings can become significant in the future. A lot of us come from very poor backgrounds, but we've done very well to break the cycles of poverty to be where we are today. Then another proverb which talks about the way of life is one's heritage should never be forgotten. This is very popular in that kind of Sakopa Yenchi. Okay, so it is always good to go back to history to understand how we are to live our lives. So these are examples of some of the proverbs that explains how we should live our lives. Okay, in the last point, it just explains what I try to bring out. Then I was talking about predestination, destiny. That destiny is not fixed. Okay, destiny is not fixed. Through hard work can break the cycles of poverty. Then elsewhere it is suggested that destiny is fixed. Destiny cannot be broken. So that brings us to the end of this session. From the outset, we've understood that the oral state of African traditional religion necessitated not only the development of various methods, but also types of information to study in order to understand the religion. Okay, and this kind of information that we needed can be categorized into primary and secondary. Under primary, we have oral sources and non-oral sources. Under primary sources, we have oral sources and non-oral sources. The oral source of information and type of information we can read by word of mouth. Okay, the non-oral source of information and the type of information that can be understood from artistic expression, from carvings, etc. Okay, then we also explain secondary sources as a type of information what is written down and understood from primary sources. We'll come to that very soon. So we explain myths on the types of oral information and the primary source of type of oral information. We explain myths. And myth is a sacred religious story that tells the truth. That's a common definition. And we also try to engage with various types of myths. Cosmogonic myths that talks about how the world was created, ecological myths that answers questions about the evolution of customs, myths, and then rules. Then we have eschatological myths that tries to explain how the world is going to transform. Okay, what reward we receive after death in the end times. Okay, so when we bring eschatological myths to Christianity, Book of Revelation, the whole Book of Revelation is an eschatological myth, right? Because under Revelation, there's so much about eternity. There's so much about how life after death looks like. Okay. So we also look at historical myths that talk about particular individuals, particular histories of a particular group of people and how they can talk about. So, for example, under the airways, you can talk about Charlie, a very important personality among the airways. Then, after looking at the types of myths, we also understand that we can glean various forms of information from the types of myths. And then in this, I was only going to refer to themes from myths or themes from a particular source. They're talking about the type of information. So what are the type of information we can get from myths? We learned that under myths, the gods are subservient to Almighty Being, meaning that the gods derive their power, they derive their being, they derive their strength from the Almighty Being. Then Proverbs also, myths also explain to us that God was not always distant from human beings, but God is distant from human beings as a result of the activities of man. Okay. Then we move on to Proverbs. Okay, we move on to Proverbs. We understand Proverbs as short, pithy statements that illustrate the fact. We talk about two aspects of Proverbs. We have surface and deeper meaning. The surface meanings are just the literal meaning you can derive. And the deeper meanings are the type of meanings you need to think thoroughly before you can understand what they intend to convey. Okay. Under Proverbs, we can discuss three types of information: theology, information about the nature of God; ethical teachings, session about acceptable behaviors in society; and philosophy of life. So the nature of God, we can talk about the spiritual nature of God, that God is spirit. We can also look at the moral nature of God, that God is kind, God is good, but man must not take God's kindness and love as his weak point. God hates evil, but he also punishes offenders, and that human beings must be appreciative to God. God also loves unity. He prefers that human beings should live peacefully among each other. Human life is sacred, and to God, for God, human life is very sacred. Therefore, when you kill someone and then the person's blood cries from the earth, God considers it a very serious sin. Then destiny, or God predestination. Human beings cannot avoid their destiny. Okay. And then the nature of God. The nature of God, as we've already explained and admits, God shares his nature with gods. Okay. The human beings and the gods. Human beings must also show patience in relation to the gods. The personal relations are very important. Okay. And then on the eschatology, you learn a lot of information about ancestors. You will come deeper the concept of ancestorship when we learn about the wrong terms that have been used to describe African traditional religion. Okay. With that, I conclude a revision of what I want to write about with the two sessions. It's supposed to be in two sessions, 1 and 2. There's 1 and 2. I'll make that change before I send the slides. Okay, so please, is there any question for me? Is there any questions for me before we move on? Man of God, are you asleep? You look as if you are sleeping.
Hello, sir.
Why are you in bed?
Sir, please, the last time you mentioned that the African traditional religion is a fossil. I want you to help me with the explanation of that point.
South African traditional religion is what?
It's a fossil religion. Fossil.
Oh, a fossil. A fossil is, so we know about a fossil is how would I describe a fossil? A fossil is an old residue of a dinosaur, or any old object. Okay, so when you find bones of a dinosaur from an archaeological dig, the bones you find from that dig they are fossils. That's what a fossil is. Okay, a fossil is an old remnant, residue of an animal or an object. Okay, now I didn't say that African traditional religion is how do you put it? It's a fossil religion. I said African traditional religion is depicted as a fossil religion because of the lack of writing. Okay, it's depicted as an old religion because of the lack of writing. However, that does not prevent it from being an authentic religion. That's the point I was trying to make in that sense. I hope I've explained myself well.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on very quickly? No questions? Okay. So we move on to the next slide. So over here, we're going to continue with what we've already began about the primary and secondary source. We ended with Proverbs, right? So we are continuing from there. That's still under oral sources. So we are moving to names. Names as an oral source of the religion. Now, names are very important because it gives identity to anyone. And not only to individuals, names give identity to places, gives identity to animals. In fact, everything on this has to have a name in order to gain identity. Without a name, you can't refer to a particular object. Okay. Now, names are very important because they express character. They express the nature of an individual. In other cases, names also given to individuals express the kind of characteristics they hope the individual can glean from the name. Okay, so when you name after your father, the idea is that your father is a good person. Therefore, you are expected to leave or you're expected to inherit certain types of information from your father. In other cases, names also serve as a way of as a form of memory. When you name someone after someone, when you name someone after an important individual, when you name a place after a politician, okay, what does it do? It helps to keep the memory of the person among the particular people who give that name. So from that point, look at names. Many ethnic groups in Africa give names which refer to God, okay, or his nature. Many ethnic groups in Africa are inclined or encouraged to give names to human beings which suggest the nature of God. And we'll come to these names very soon. But names help us understand philosophy and theology. Okay, I've explained in the previous slides what theology is. I've also explained what philosophy is. I'm not going to go any much deeper, but as we explain the types of information we can get from theology and philosophy, it helps us to understand what theology is. Helps us to understand what information we can glean through names about theology. Helps us to understand the kind of information we can glean about how we have to live our lives and our philosophy of life. So now theology. Theology, what are the types of information we can glean from names? So, like as I explained, names speak to the nature of God. Okay, names in various ways help us understand who God is. Of course, we don't have any idea about how God looks like, about whether he's even a man or a woman. But through the kind of names we give to God, we have an understanding of who he is. For example, they can say, okay, something which is something which is very bright, like the sun. Okay, God is bright. Their names also explain the transcendent nature of God. Okay, God is transcendent. God is not human. God is spirit. Okay. Then the personal names of people and towns also refer to God. Now, any personal name, any name of a person, a place, or a thing that refers to God are called theophorous names. Theophorous in the sense that when you look at the meaning of that name that is given, it refers to a nature of God that is expected to be portrayed in a person. For example, in our Stedina and Sakako means God loves me. Okay, of course, we can refer to a lot of examples in our camp where a lot of parents name their children with theophorous names. For example, Nyameba, Nyamebechre, Adepa. Okay, a lot of theophorous names are very prevalent even among Christians now. Okay, so that is about theology. Names helps us to understand the nature of God. It helps us to understand theophorous names. Theophorous names refer to the nature of God and how God is. Okay. Then names also refer to theology. Or under theology, names also reveal the nature of God. Okay. For example, Patanya, which is the name of a god, means who is not pacified. Then Tano, Pra, and Bosonkin are all names that were given to gods. Okay. In fact, I think in most towns, most of the rivers are named after the gods. We have River Pra, for which the town Praso was named. We can talk about the Cobra River, which is believed to be the name of a god. A lot of rivers are named after gods. Then also through names, we understand the belief in ancestors. Okay, we understand the belief in ancestors. There are names which help to explain what ancestorship is. There are names which also explain the relationship living human beings have with relatives who have passed away. As I explained, human beings continue to name their children through them. Human beings continue to give their children names of their relatives as a way of keeping the memory of these relatives. Then also names depicting reincarnation. Reincarnation is a very central theme, not only in indigenous religions like African traditional religion, but also in Christianity. Okay. Then names also explain the sense of God. So among certain cultures, certain names seem to suggest God is man. Okay, that God is a father. Okay, but you can also find certain names that depict God as a woman. All right. The names also suggest or give information about destiny. So, like we realize that we're coming across information which is very peculiar to certain sources. For example, we learned about destiny and the proverbs. If you remember very well, we learned that there are certain proverbs that explain destiny. Okay, predestination, what destiny is, and how one can avoid or maintain his or her destiny. Now let's move to philosophy of life. Now, names also help us to explain how, or how, help us to understand how we have to live our lives. Okay, names also help us to understand how we are not feeling right. For example, names help us to avoid bitterness or dissent among human beings. And we understand through names that horizontal relationship with fellow human beings. Okay, horizontal relationship refers to how we relate to fellow human beings. It's equally as important to a vertical relationship with God. The horizontal relationship with fellow human beings is equally important to the vertical relationship with respect to God. So also through names, for example, during certain festivals, it is used to depict bad occurrences in the society. In a particular town here in Commander, in the Kenya municipality, what they do is that during the festival, they move around. Let's say you've been chasing about after people's lives, or you've been stealing, or you were a drunkard. They go through the streets and they name people. They don't mention a particular name, but the way the chants are made will let everyone know that you're the one they're referring to. So it's a way of questioning people against bad behavior. And names, which in this case are indirect names, are used to conscientize people about the need to what lead good lives. So we looked at let me see, I think there's a little mistake in the slide. Let's go to songs. Songs as an oral source of a religion. So songs are very essential in African traditional religion. Songs are used to express appreciation, thankfulness, and requests from God. So there are three types of songs in African traditional religion. We have recreational songs, songs that are sung for recreation, are sung for enjoyment when one is having a wedding or something. Then we also have occupational songs. This is very popular among the fancies who live by the sea, and then they always also are fishermen. When they pull their nets, sing a lot of um, um, occupational songs. We also have worship songs, which are sung when man is in touch with his creator. Now, what are the types of information we can glean from songs? One, theology. Once again, let me repeat that in addressing any question on the source of information, try to categorize these ones under theology, ethics, and philosophy of life. Across board, these are the three general things. And within these three things, you can describe or discuss any information under theology. So you can discuss information about theology. How do songs give information about theology? You can do that in a message. It's much easier for the marker, and much easier for anyone who wants to understand what you're reading. So let's come back to our content. Under theology, songs helps us to understand the nature of God. We sing about God and helps us to understand who He is and what He wants. Then also helps us to express sorrow. Okay, helps us to understand life after death, helps us to understand our ancestors. Okay, for example, Thegis helps portray this very strong. Now, there's a strong relationship between songs and witchcraft. Okay, witchcraft is a very hated concept. Okay, in fact, across most religions in Sub-Saharan Africa, witchcraft is a very hated concept, and there are songs which are sung to warn against witches. Okay, then there are also songs that teach moral values. I'm sure that when we go into our various backgrounds, we can give examples of certain songs that teaches us what you have to do and what you do not have to do if you want to be at peace with them. So, my dear friends, I have quickly gone through names as an oral source of the religion. Let me move to the non-oral source before we come for any questions. So, non-oral sources of the religion. So, we are still doing primary sources. We're still doing primary sources of the religion, where we have oral and non-oral sources. So non-oral sources are basically arts and crafts. Okay, arts and crafts are information we can glean from carvings, from earrings, from sculpture, from clay images, which talks about their religion. So what are the types of information you can get from non-oral sources? And theology. Once again, we can express our belief in and then the nature of God. So, for example, the pygmies, they claim that one has never seen God. Okay, the pygmies claim that one has never seen God, and therefore they have certain carvings which goes to show that one can never have an image of God. Then our popular example, okay, for example, Jinyame, okay, which talks about can God be the only God, Almighty baby. And we can also refer to particular shrines. Talking about arts and crafts. Now there are shrines which depict the picture of God and theology. For example, we have the Tigari shrine. Okay, we have the Economic shrine, the shrine of Latte. Okay, all these shrines go to show the nature of the particular kind of beings of God they are created with. Okay. Then Islam theology. Arts and crafts talks about helps us understand ancestorship. Okay. And through arts and crafts, we understand that ancestors are only separated from us through death, but they continue to relate to us in the original settings that they were. So, for example, if you have a father who is dead, the father that is dead doesn't mean that he's not your father. You have a sister who passed on, it's still your sister, who's just in the spirit world. Okay. Then there are also certain marks which are used to depict ancestors. I know of the Egun Society of the Yoruba. Now, you will find videos of these masked individuals who go around the town, sometimes whipping people. They are very scared people, very sick people. They're believed to impact a lot of moral values in the society. During that festival, they're believed to represent representations of ancestors who stand for certain moral values and indeed quit any form of vices that occurs in society. Now, there's also a relationship between arts and craft and medicine. Okay, arts and craft and medicine. When you go to a particular shrine, when you go to a particular fetish priest to help you to heal a particular disease, they use various types of arts and craft. For example, they use cowries, they will use human scalp, human scalp to delay or to predict your illness and to give the kind of herbs you're supposed to take to cure that particular illness. So there's a very direct relationship between art and craft, for example, cowries, and how the fetish priests practice African traditional medicine. Then also arts and crafts is also sometimes used in rainmaking. Okay, rainmaking. There are individuals who have the power to manipulate forces of nature to cause rain to occur. Now, of course, this is very, very important in African setting, which is mostly agrarian. We are mostly farmers, and therefore, in the past, rainmakers held a very important, respectable positions in society. Okay, very recently, about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, there is this rainmaker in Nigeria who dared BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, to come and then observe how he could manipulate the forces of nature. So a group was sent from Britain. That time I was doing my PhD in the UK, so I remember very well. And they came down, they offered a number of drinks to the rainmaker. They also offered some drinks. Okay. Then the rainmaker told them to come after a week at a particular time of the day. So they came with their news or with their reports, with their reporters, and then their media instruments, and they waited for the rain. Even though it didn't rain heavily, the weather changed a bit, and it's drizzle. Okay, but that's enough. That alone was enough for the rainmaker to suggest that drizzling is raining, so he'll be able to control the challenge he made. Okay, so rainmaking is done through the combination of various arts and crafts. Okay, now when you read your manuals, you will learn that rainmaking is done through human skulls, through the combination of cowries. They bring all these forms of arts and crafts together and then chant words that causes rain to occur. All right. Then arts and crafts are also represented in totems. Now, what's a totem? A totem is simply a natural object that signifies a spiritual relationship between a group of people and then the spiritual world. Okay, so for example, among the Ashantis, there are particular totems that they believe express a form of relationship between the people and the Almighty Being. Each of the 7 clans or 7 or 8 clans among the Ashantis is believed to have a particular totem. Okay, now these totems are represented by through arts and crafts. So, for example, when you take particular language stuff, okay, at the end of the language stuff, you will find what we call filials, F-I-L-I-A-L-S, filials, which are usually depictive of what the totem is. Okay, you'll find a lot of, sometimes it could be a bird, it could be an egg, it could be a particular type of animal, a lion. These are all totems which express how a group of people share a form of spiritual relationship with the secret. Then also arts and crafts is also used to express how we should live our lives. Okay, how we should live our lives. There are certain concepts or principles that are expressed through arts and crafts. Okay, and these are sometimes also expressed, like I said, through filials. The language stuff, the end. When I talk about the language stuff, you find particular arts and crafts which is used to depict how we should live. Like, for example, the grass symbol is used to depict how important one's heritage is. You should respect culture. It's always important to go back to history to understand how we should live our lives. Then arts and crafts also help us understand way of life, moral lessons, right and wrong, good and bad. Okay. For example, among the Siame clan of Nango, the cashew nut is used to teach the concept of reciprocity. Okay. The concept of remembering or being appreciative of what someone has done for you. The belief is that the cashew nut saved them from drought once. Okay, the cashew nut in their history, they were traveling once. The cashew nut was what they ate, to save them from drought, from hunger farming. And then therefore they place a very important spiritual reverence on the cashew nuts. And also among the breakthrough clan of the account, bravery is a very important moral lesson. While the Ayoko clan, or the Ayoko clan, for example, before you have Ayoko, the Tankoro, they believe in patience. Okay, patience is a very cherished theme among these people. Let me pause there for some. Let me pause there for questions. Are there any questions in relation to what we've done so far about the types of information we can glean from names, from songs, and from non-oral sources? Is there any question? If you can start talking, because I can't see if your hand is raised. Please, are there any comments in the chat which requires regress? Are there any comments in the chat which requires that I go there to answer? Okay, no. Okay, thank you very much, sir. Okay, so let's move on. Now we've looked at primary sources. Primary sources, we have oral sources and non-oral sources. We've tried to break down the various types of information we can glean from the various types of oral sources, non-oral sources we have. There are challenges in using primary sources. What are some of the challenges? One is language. Okay. In fact, like any language, like any form of aspect of culture, language is quite a challenge for the outsider. So, for example, you want to study funeral rites among the animal people, okay, and you want to study their myths, okay, to understand how funeral rites are performed. You will need to learn the language, and learning the language takes no less than a year. Okay, you need to learn the language in order for you to adequately understand the religion. Now, this only applies to outsiders, those who are not insiders or natives of the religion. But for the outsider, for the white person, for the foreigner, language is always a barrier when you try to use primary sources. Then there's also some of the language, there's also time and language development. Now, religious language, okay, the type of language that is used in worship, type of language that is used in rituals, etc., sometimes develop, or in most cases, develops separately from the way language develops in many cultures. So, for example, when you go to the Hebrew religion, okay, when you go to the Hebrew religion, the Hebrew spoken in Israel now, the Hebrew spoken in Israel today is very different from the Hebrew that was used in writing the New Testament. Okay, you may find similarities, but it requires studies, years and years upon study, for you to understand how language is used. The language used in writing scriptures now is different from how it's used in writing. This is a challenge of using primary sources. Word of language. Okay, so here again, we see two challenges in language. One, first challenge is where the outsider needs to learn a language in order to engage with the oral source of the religion. And two, language development, where a scholar or a student of religion needs to go back into history to study how language was used at that time in order to understand how oral sources can be used. There's also the problem of interpretation. Okay, it is very important that scholars try to attach a lot of cultural nuance, a lot of cultural facts to how they interpret oral sources. Of course, religion and culture are very intertwined. You cannot separate culture from religion. Okay. So, for example, if you want to explain Jinyami very well, you will need a deeper understanding of what Jinyami is culturally in order for you to explain it scholarly. All right. So, interpretation is quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge, especially for someone who is not indigenous to the particular religion understand. Another phase of interpretation is what the challenge of oral narratives, what we've engaged, what we've seen throughout what we've done so far. Okay, oral narratives can sometimes be inaccurate. Imagine passing down a particular story over thousands of years. If caution is not taken, inaccuracies may creep in and render parts of the story inaccurate. Then challenges of using arts and crafts. So remember, arts and crafts are also part of primary sources. So we're just separating it for it to be easier for you guys to engage with that when you're replacing. So challenges of arts and crafts. Arts and crafts are sometimes removed from the geographical location. So when we're colonized, for example, Mother Shanties and among the airways, a lot of artifacts, a lot of arts and crafts were moved from Africa to countries like Britain, Portugal, etc. Now, some of these artifacts are retained. Some of these artifacts are retained to their original settings. However, when they're sometimes retained, it's sometimes difficult to understand how these artifacts were used at that time in comparison to how they can be used now. Because in most cases, when these artifacts are removed, memory doesn't serve to help particular ethnic groups to remember the purpose, the particular purpose for which these artifacts are used. Okay. Then the second point has to deal with the kind of meanings that we attach to certain arts and crafts. Okay, the kind of meanings we attach to certain arts and crafts. For example, in the olden days, fetish. No, let me not use the term fetish because the term fetish itself is considered a derogatory term when learning African traditional religion. So in the past, traditional priests, what we call comfort, they used to wear cowries in their hair, okay, as a way of identification. Okay, but now, when you wear cowries, they identify to be demonic. Okay, so the way certain arts and crafts is used, it was used in the past, is different from how it is used now. Now you find ladies wearing cowries on their ankles, or you find them wearing it on their wrists, or you find certain guys wearing cowries on their wrists. Okay, so arts and crafts have been given different meanings due to fashion and modernism. Then also another challenge with using arts and crafts is that certain religions like Christianity regard certain forms of arts and crafts as demonic. I can give a typical example of cowries. Okay, it is seen as being demonic. Once you are seen wearing a carry on your ankles, they are portrayed to be demonic, they are portrayed to be occultic, they are portrayed to be a prostitute. Okay, so the kind of meanings attached to arts and crafts by certain religions make it challenging for anyone to try to understand the real meaning of that. Now, I have explained documentary signal. I've explained secondary sources as any type of information that is gained or gleaned from primary sources. Okay, so if any writes, let me make this distinction. Someone can go and observe a festival and write a book about it. Okay. Now, the book written by the person is not a secondary source. It's a primary source. Why? Because the person reporting it went to observe the festival himself. So when anyone goes to observe a particular ritual, when anyone has first-hand information about a particular ritual, and they write a book, an article, or a magazine about that ritual, that can be termed a primary source. However, if anyone writes anything about a particular ritual without having first-hand contact with that ritual, that is what is termed a secondary source. So, for example, I sit in my room, I read a lot about naming ceremonies in Ghana, and then I write a book about it. I read about naming ceremonies from articles online, etc. And I write a book about it. I publish about it. Now, what is published is not primary, it's secondary. Why? Because I did not go to observe naming ceremonies myself. I'm only publishing from the observations I made from what I read online and then in person. Okay, so please let us make that distinction between primary sources and secondary sources, and that will help us understand much better. Now, challenges in using secondary sources. Before we move to the challenges in using secondary sources of the religion, we need to understand how secondary writing or secondary sources evolve across history. Now, we have always said that African traditional religion is an oral religion. Therefore, we didn't write our scriptures down. So when did we start writing? That's what we are going to look at. So pre-colonial times, okay, pre-colonial times, before the white man came, how did the white man even get to hear about our religion? What were some of the ways Africa derived a spread of its cultural beliefs? Now we had businessmen, merchants, Arabic travelers who used to travel around the continent of Africa, dealing in gold, salt, etc., or even slaves in slavery. But this is barter trade, okay, where they travel around in caravans and deal in gold, silver, etc. Now, when these people traveled, when these merchants traveled, they used to also be invited by chieftains, etc. They used to be invited to religious programs. And then they recorded some of these events in their journals. Okay. And by recording some of these events in their journals, they returned back to different parts of the world, published these journals, and that is how information about African traditional religion began to spread through the activities of merchants. That is pre-colonial times. So, still the pre-colonial era, after missionaries, after the Western world, including Europe, etc., after they gained much information from travelers about how the African was practicing his religion, they decided that no, this part of our world needed to be converted. They needed to know who God was. Okay, so missionaries were sent. Okay, of course, once missionaries were sent, Christian soldiers were also sent to protect missionaries. Now, these missionaries did a lot of war, did a lot of harm to African traditional religion. Because when they came to our religion, they did not engage firsthand in how we practice our religion. They studied our religion from afar. They wrote a lot of books about what African traditional religion was, and that gave a lot of native names, okay, to African tradition. We will learn about native names like ancestorship, fetishism, etc. Okay, but missionaries came, wrote about it. Christian soldiers also came. They also wrote about how we practice our religion. But these writings were not accurate. They were very, very inaccurate and very unrepresentative of what our religion was. Sorry. So colonial times, the colonial era, the missionaries have come, they've sent soldiers to protect the missionaries. Okay. Then they found out that apart from spreading the gospel, they also wanted to conduct trade, particularly slave trade. They realized the African was very strong. The African could be sent back to plantations in Africa to work and then create wealth for the white man. So colonization began, slavery began. But while this was also occurring, they also needed to understand the culture of the people. Okay, because to work with someone, you need to engage with the culture of the people. And then you must also understand that they worked with people who helped to capture various individuals from among the communities for slavery. So for them to understand how we think, they needed to understand our culture. And to do this, they brought in anthropologists, they brought in religious scholars to come and study the African culture and help in facilitating more trade. Okay. Now, these people also didn't do so well like the Christian scholars who came earlier. Even though they had the scholarly skills to engage with the culture and religion of the African, they still did not go to the African to really understand. Probably out of fear, probably out of the fear of catching any kind of disease or illnesses. They stayed back in their own rooms, they stayed back in the castles and observed from afar how the African practice their religion. Okay. Now these people are called armchair scholars. So they also wrote about their religion, but they were secondary sources because they were very inaccurate. And then this content they gleaned was not from primary contact with the way of life of the African. Now, after the religious scholars have been brought in by the white man to help them to understand their culture, they also started educating some of our people. Okay. You can talk about J.B. Dankwa, you can talk about Philip Kweku, and then they send them to countries like the UK so that they could come back and then help to also educate their own people. Now, these scholars also wrote about African traditional religion. But let us not forget that they were very much tied to the aprons of their masters. They gained their scholarship, they gained their funding, they gained their authority from the white man. Therefore, they were very careful about what they wrote about their religion. They were very careful about what they wrote about their religion. And in many cases, some of their writings may not be termed secondary, may not be termed primary, sorry, because they were very inaccurate and unrepresentative of the African culture. Now we have contemporary African writers. Africa has gained independence. People had resources to go and study on their own and come back and write about African history. And they were able to do so very freely, meaning they were able to utilize the kind of methods that would allow people to, scholars to go to particular ethnic groups, live with them, observe their way of life, and write accurate depictions of how these African cultures practice their religion. So right now from the pre-colonial times, the contemporary African writers, we can say that contemporary African writers consist of a crop of writers who wrote great sources about their religion. Okay, and to date we have a lot of sources from religion. So, my dear friends, this is how secondary sources developed and evolved from pre-colonial times to contemporary African writers. It helps us to understand how we can distinguish between primary and secondary sources. Are there any questions, please? Are there any questions, please?
No, sir.
Okay. I would like to take an early break now. I would like to take an early break now. So it's 8:30. Let us report back at 8:45. Is that okay?
Very well, sir.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. So we come back at 8:45. Thank you.
Please, good morning. Colleagues, please, good morning. Colleagues, please, good morning.
Yes, good morning,
Ah,
madam.
please, has the class ended?
No, please. We are on break. We'll be back at 8:45.
Okay, okay. Like before then, my the audio I wasn't getting it clear. That's why. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for
Oh,
disturbing.
no problem.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Oh, atade koraa sɛ eh,
Okay, we're a minute late, so let's continue. Before I continue, please, do you have any questions on what we've done so far? Is there anything we need clarity on? Okay, let's move on. Okay. So before we went on break, we traced a line. We traced a line from when outsiders began to write about their religion to now, to contemporary times, and Africans themselves continue to write about religion. And we have understood the kind of challenges that were presented at each stage of the development of writing of African traditional. And let us have a bit of interaction here. Please help us. I hope for us interactions. What do you think are the major challenges presented by the various group of writers from pre-colonial times to contemporary writers? What are the challenges or what are the benefits that is presented to what African traditional religion is by those who are trying to write their own? Can I get some contributions from there? You stop talking without because I can't see your hands. Stop talking. What are the kind of challenges that were presented because of the way writing started in African traditional religion, because of the way about African traditional religion started? Let us take the first crop, pre-colonial times, when individuals who were not Africans came to conduct trade in Africa and began sharing information through writing about their religion. What do you think the challenge is presented here? Illuminata. Is Illuminata there?
Yes, sir.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, sir.
You understand my question?
Yes, sir.
So what do you think?
So I think language was a challenge
Okay.
because when they came, most of them couldn't speak our language, they didn't understand. So they have to get people to teach them their language, now do translation to our people. So I think language was a barrier for them in documenting the African traditional religion.
That's true. That's very correct. But if they were able to get people to help them understand the language, probably through sign language, and later help them to learn a bit of the language, why didn't they get the people to also teach them about their religion, about our religion? That is why I find a bit of a challenge. Okay, so for those who came to conduct trade, to those who came to colonize us, I feel that they were more interested in the benefits they were going to derive from religion, from their culture, rather than really understanding the culture itself. So, in other words, a scholar will be much motivated by the fact that we can publish. But most of these scholars who came already have professorial positions in universities in UK, in Europe. They already have positions that are giving them funding to come down to Africa and come to understand our religion. But I really don't understand why they were so much unmotivated to go to the people themselves, because they were already communicating with them. They were already liaising with some of the people to capture slaves. They're already liaising with them to get them women to sleep with. They're already liaising with them for business and trade. So what prevented them from learning their language, learning their culture directly, and then learning more about our religion? Those are questions for us also answer. Thank you, Matter. Okay, any other contribution? Illuminati suggests that language was a barrier for colonial writers who wrote about the religion. But Illuminati language wasn't a barrier for pre-independent writers because they were natives who could come back to our religion to study. So they had no excuse in their misrepresentation of our religion. Do you agree with me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other contribution, please? Is a Haji around? Is a Haji around?
Yes, please.
Haji.
I'm pondering over it.
Okay. All right. Safiatu, the contributions to make about how how do you say the challenges presented by the various groups who wrote about our religion.
Hello.
Anyone at all?
Hello.
Okay, Yabwedu.
Hello.
Put your hand up.
Hello. Hello.
Mr. Wedu.
Hello.
Put your hand up, please.
Yes, sir.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Can I move on? Okay. My contribution is that one of the major challenges was that they were not directly interested in the religion, but along the way they wanted to study the religion for their mischievous means. That's what I can say about it.
Along the way, they wanted to do what?
They are not interested in the religion, but they wanted to use religion. They wanted to use it as a pretext to get their meaning within the African.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's the point I made right now. That they may not have been so much interested in the religion itself, but it served as the way of continuing their livelihood. They were professors. They really needed to write about their religion. Okay, but let us be cautious here in making those assumptions. Why would anyone travel all the way from Europe across the Atlantic Ocean to come and understudy our religion without having authentic interest? So let's disagree with it. Yes, Ejewa.
Please, I have a question. I've raised my hand so many times for so many occasions that you've not called me.
I'm sorry.
I'm having challenges with. Before we went for the break, we were talking about the difference. We said there is a difference between ATR and that of culture. I don't know. I heard something like that, but then I wanted to get more clarification into it.
There is a difference between ATR.
I raised my hand, but he didn't call me. After the break, I did, but still, I want to know. Like, I'm getting confused here. The differences between ATR and that of culture, because I don't know. I don't know. Thank you.
Ejewa, first of all, I'm sorry for the delay in calling you. It's not intentional. Like I said, I needed someone to. I wanted you to nominate someone to draw my attention, but no one volunteered. So apologies. Let me get your question right here. You said the difference between ATR and culture.
Yes.
I don't get your question.
Yes, please.
Sir,
please, I want to know the difference between ATR and culture, because I was seeing that culture is in ATR. The culture of Africans are found in ATR. So If you are saying that there is a difference between culture and that of ATR, I want to know so that I can make my nose out of its place.
What did I say? There's a difference between culture and ATR.
Please, that is how what I heard. Please.
No, no. There is no difference between. In fact, I said there is no separation between culture and religion. Culture informs religion. If you want to understand the religion of a people, you need to understand their culture in many ways before you can understand their religion. Well, probably I miscommunicated, but it is not. It's totally untrue to state that there's a difference between religions. Are you okay?
Yes, sir.
Are you okay?
Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you.
So please, there's someone who is there with the mic on? Someone press the button. I had you.
Yes, sir.
Please don't mute your mic a bit. Okay, thank you. Good. So if there are no questions, I believe we can move on. Let's move on. So we've looked at the challenges in how secondary sources were written. Yes.
Hello,
Yes,
sir.
Mr. Tete.
So, sir, with the challenges, can I say that because there was no existing doctrine or documents on the ATR, so it made the studying of their religion very difficult for them because there was nothing documented for them to base their study on. So it made studying kind difficult for them.
Yeah, that is the starting point, right? That has always been the starting point in how writing started. But you see, my main concern here is that we have said that writing African already wasn't an oral read, but I'm questioning the challenges that are presented because of how these various writers wrote. So those who came to conduct business, the Arab merchants, the Arab merchants who came to conduct business from across North Africa and then wrote about African traditional religion. What do you think are some of the challenges that the way they wrote presented to the religion? The missionaries who came to study our religion, the missionaries who came to convert us, what are some of the challenges that come up because of the way they wrote about our religion? The ethnographers, the scholars who were brought in by our colonizers to help them understand our religion so that they can write about. What are some of the challenges that were presented by the way they wrote about our religion? Fourthly, the pre-independence writers, Africans who had opportunity to go and study English, gain degrees, and then come and write about their own religions. What were some of the challenges that you think came about as a result of the way they wrote about their religion? Then finally, can we talk about any challenges that were presented from the way, how do you call them? Contemporary African writers who had no obligations to the colonizers were able to go and study. For example, for myself or any of the professors at UCC, most of us have had opportunities to gain scholarships to go and study and come back and come and teach. Okay, so I can come back to Omina, I understand the Omina language, I understand the Omina culture, therefore I can really understand their religion. But does this present any challenge to how the religion is written? This is what I want us to discuss. So if there are any contributions to this, fine. But even if there are no contributions, I would strongly suggest that you use this question as the contact point for your revision.
Oh, okay, sir.
When revising for your exams, okay. Okay, let's move on. It's 9 o'clock. We have done with unit 1 and 2. 1 more units to go. Let us move to unit 3. Okay, so we are pushing forward. In unit 3, we are going to understand the concept of worship in African traditional religion. The concept of worship in African traditional religion. When we say worship, what does it mean and what does it suggest to the African and to anyone who wants to understand African indigenous religion? Okay, so we will look at the meaning of worship. We will try to understand certain types of worship, certain forms of worship. And we look at the importance of these forms of worship to African traditional religion. Okay. So let us start. Now let us begin with this introductory question. When we mention worship, can anyone give me its literal translation in her own language? Let me start off with mine. As a fancy, as a worship directly translates as a song. That's what I've stated in the second question. Worship directly translates as a song, meaning to serve. So that is the literal translation of worship. But let us not forget that worship as a term was not given by Africans themselves to how we relate with our ultimate being. It was given by the white man through his own understanding of how we conduct our relationship with the spiritual. Okay, so worship. Let us what we're trying to do to understand whether worship, to begin with, is an appropriate term to use to describe how the African is religious. So I've given an example. A song. A song means to serve. In African traditional religion, that a song simply means to serve someone, to be a slave to someone. Any contributions from here, please? Once again, I can't see. So if you want to talk, please don't only raise your hand. You can start talking. Yes, sir.
Yeah, in our context,
What's your question again?
Worship, it is an act of showing. Hello.
Okay, so I have 2 questions coming up. One is, one is asking for clarity with the question. My dear friend, answering the question. Let me just give a quick. What I'm asking is, I want you to give me your literal translations of worship in your own language, and whether these literal translations accurately depicts how the African relates with the religious. Okay, that's my question. So please, the one who is answering, can you start again? And can you speak more loudly? I can't hear you. It's very faint.
Okay. Okay. So when we say worship, in our context, we can say that it's an act of showing homage to one's object, which is considered as supreme.
Good. Good. So you define worship.
Hallelujah.
Okay. Now I want you to give me are you an Akan? Are you an Ewe? Where do you come from?
So I'm an Akan.
Good. So worship means a song, right? The literal translation of worship in Akan is a song, right?
Yeah.
And a song means to be a slave. So from that angle, does the word worship accurately describe being religious for the African? To be a slave to someone, is that what the African does in his religion? No. Answer is no. Worship may not accurately describe how the African is religious, or as you explained, how the African relates to the object of worship. Worship goes beyond being a slave. Worship goes beyond being humble. It goes beyond offering reverence. Worship is more the African way of life in relation to the supreme. It's more holistic than just being a servant. So, as a starting point, the term worship may not accurately describe how the African is religious. That's the point I want to make here. I wish I could get more literal translation. Illuminata, I'm sorry I keep on mentioning your name because it's easy to remember your name. Can you give us the literal meaning of the term worship in your culture?
So worship is is to serve. Though mostly we refer the worship to the supreme being, but there are other ways we serve other people. And in my little, that one we so refer to it as worship. You are worshiping the person because the person is higher than you or something, or you need something from the person in the near future, or it's just a form of respect.
Good. So that is similar to what we are discussing for my
Yes,
my. Okay. Mr. Opon, Roxanne Opon, please, can you give us? No, let me find someone. Okay, Sarah Ojo, please, are you a Kobo, a Nigerian, or what? Let us know where you're from. Miss Sarah Ojo, are you there?
Hello, I'm there, sir.
Sarah,
Yes, sir.
your name, where do you come from?
I'm a Yoruba by tribe.
Very good.
In Nigeria, and a Ghanaian by birth.
Okay, thanks for showing your dual language. So, Sarah, worship. Okay, how is worship translated literally in your Yoruba language?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, it means giving honor to your deity.
Good. So let me ask you, Sarah, does the African only give honor to his deity? Does the African, when the African conducts his relates to the deity, is it only about giving honor?
Sir, please come again.
Okay. I'm asking you. Oh, sorry. So you've explained that worship is about, in Yoruba language, it means giving honor to your deity. Thank you very much. And I'm following up to find out whether the Yoruba man or Yoruba woman only gives honor. Okay. Is it only about giving honor to the deity?
No, please. We serve.
Yes. So it goes beyond that. Okay.
Yes,
so this goes, thank you very much, Sarah. So this goes to buttress my point that worship is not only about giving honor or reverence. A white man's understanding of our language, of our religion as worship, is a wrong basis to start from. Okay. Yes, so that is the point I want to make. Let me go back to the presentation. So from that, we have seen that worship is not only about giving reverence. Worship is not only about giving honor. Okay, it's about asking for favors. It's about showing respect. It's about requesting something from the supreme being. It's about even giving praise alone to the supreme being. So the term worship is not only about a song. It's not only about reverence. That's the point I want to make here. So please, when you are engaging with any question on worship, it's important that you make the point here that the name worship given by the white man may not be very representative of what the African does in relation to supernatural. Let's move on. So worship, as was defined by our friend, is a total response in action, okay, of a religious person to the ultimate reality. So whenever anyone decides to relate with his creator, his or her creator, in form of praise, in form of worship, that is described as worship. Now, worship can be seen in two categories: sacred time and sacred space. These are two very important additional concepts to understand. Now, sacred time refers to any point at which the African decides to relate with the ultimate reality. It can be during work, it can be when the person is about to sleep, it's about when the person is about to eat. Okay. Now, all these various moments, okay, are ways in which the African is able to what? Relate with the ultimate reality, sacred time. They also have sacred space. Now, these sacred spaces include areas where worship is conducted, okay, and areas where areas which are considered sacred. Okay, so we have certain rivers which are considered sacred. Excuse me. There are certain rivers where you need to remove your sandals before you can cross. There are certain forests you dare not enter. Okay, there are certain particular geographical areas which is considered sacred, and therefore only the fetish priestess can what maneuver. So all these are what we call sacred spaces. They are geographical spaces in any way or form where worship is conducted and which is considered holy. Now let us look at prayer as a form of worship. Okay, prayer as a form of worship. I also have another definition. So prayer is a deliberate act on the part of humans with the purpose of communicating with the ultimate reality. It's a deliberate act to communicate with the ultimate reality, and we can do this in the form of hymns. We also do this in the form of chants. Okay, those who chant know how it's done. They also have spontaneous and intelligent utterances. So any spontaneous utterance can, for example, what we call glosolalia, or speaking in tongues. Okay, that is non-intelligent because only you understand. So glosolalia or speaking in tongues is considered non-intelligent. And then intelligent forms of prayer are prayers you and the third problem. Please, can the person mute the mic? Is distracting me. So if we look at the definition of prayer, we've looked at forms of prayer. Now we can also understand items used for prayer. The most popular one is water, which is used as libation. Alcohol is also used as libation. Among the airways, they also use water mixed with flour, also used for libation, and then also very popular. I think most popular than water is any form of alcoholic beverages, local beer, strong alcoholic drinks. These are used as ways of communicating the ultimate reality through prayer. Then types of prayer. So we have Thanksgiving prayers, and these are done to show appreciation to the ultimate reality, to show appreciation for a favor that has been done, for blessings that have been received. They also have petitionary prayers. You can put a petition before God through prayer. That's a petitionary prayer. Then intercessory prayer. Let me just take a step back. For Catholics and Methodists during church, a group of people are called by the priest to come to the altar to come and give petitions. So that's a petitionary prayer, okay? Then intercessory prayer. Now, this is a very popular request. Oh, sorry about time, man. When you check
now, here, Mumma, dear, Namonia. You were your first one of them. So I'm money the free from. Yeah.
Mr. Dodo, do you mind muting your mic, please? Mr. Dodo, please, you are distracting me. Mute your mic. Thank you. Sorry about that. So let me quickly go over the types of prayer. Thanksgiving prayer, giving an appreciation for blessings, for favors received from the ultimate reality. Petitionary prayer, these are prayers offered to ask for favors, to request for favors from the sacred or from the supernatural. The intercessory prayer, this is any prayer you offer on the account of someone. Okay, oh, Bonpai Mami, or Bonpai Mami in some kind of way. These are intercessory prayers. Then adoration. Okay, these are simply prayers which are signed to give praise to God, to offer, to accept His position in our lives, and to accept how great He is. We also have adoration prayers. Then we also have imprecatory prayer. This is a very interesting form of prayer. This is done when someone raises on himself, usually in order to prove innocence. Okay, you invoke curses on yourself to prove a form of innocence on an issue that has come up. Then we have an oath. Okay, an oath is a kind of prayer usually made, usually at the beginning of an office. For example, a chief will make an oath before embarking on before sitting on the stool, or an elder can make an oath before becoming a family head. Okay, so a prayer of oath is the kind of prayer made usually as a result before you assume any kind of official duty in the religion. Now we are also supposed to understand the structure of prayer. Okay, structure of prayer. So when you take any form of prayer in African traditional religion, it has a particular format. And this is a very popular question. It has come up, at least in my college, a number of times. It's also come up in the switch exam. So let us pay particular attention here. The first part of prayer is what we call the invocation. The invocation. So whenever the parish priest starts his prayers, he mentions Almighty name. Okay. Then after that, they mention any important deity in the area, any important god in the area. Okay, before they mention the ancestors. Okay, so before the first part of prayer is what we call the roll call of the gods and ancestors. A roll call of the gods and ancestors, where the Almighty be in addition to any other important deity and ancestors are called upon. After calling upon the gods and ancestors, then you put forward your your petition. What is the reason why you are praying? What is the request? You want to ask for a favor? You want to seek clarification from the gods? At this part of the prayer, you make a clear request of what you really want for the date. Then we have the concluding remarks. Okay. Usually takes the form of a blessing where they bless the gods. In some cases, they remind the gods of the reason why they are gods. Okay, later we will learn that Africans have the power to discard gods. They realize that a particular god is not being potent. They have the ability or they have the right to discard you, but you cannot discard of ancestors. Okay, therefore, at the end of prayer, the one offering the prayer, the offerer, reminds the gods and ancestors, reminds the gods of their role, and asks for a fulfillment of the request made in the second part of the prayer. One other thing that is done at the conclusion is the cursing of anyone who does not wish good for the living. During the concluding prayer, a curse is placed on anyone who does not bode well for those who have gathered for any form of prayer. Okay, most especially witches. Now, we know that witches are very much hated in every culture in Sub-Saharan Africa. So usually, at the end of prayer, for example, in the Canadian religion, they state that they treat children, the poor curses by pouring libation on anyone who doesn't mean well or mean good for those who have gathered for the purpose of the prayer. So please, these are the parts of prayer. We have the invocation, where a roll call is made of the gods and ancestors during the Almighty being. Then we have the petition, where a statement is made of exactly what we intend to gain from the prayer. And then the concluding remark, where blessing, the gods are reminded of the reason why they are gods, and curses are rained upon anyone who intends to prevent the purpose of prayer from manifesting. So we're done with prayer. Now we're moving to sacrifice. Sacrifice. Sacrifice is not another form of worship. Sacrifice comes etymologically comes from two Latin words, sacer and facere. Okay, sacer means to set aside something which is profane, something which is worldly for the use of the sacred. And facere means to make. Okay, so sacrifice simply means to make a sacrifice. Now, sacrifice is therefore an acting which an object is set aside or consecrated for the use of the sacred and given to the supernatural people. That is a simple definition you can give to sacrifice. Sacrifice is a form of worship. It's an acting which an object is set aside or consecrated for the use of the sacred. All right. Now, we have two theories which try to explain how sacrifice came about. Okay, we have what we call the gift theory and then the communion theory. Now, the gift theory suggests that sacrifice started as a gift to the gods. Sacrifice started as a gift to the gods. Therefore, that is how it started, but later came up to mean a form of prayer, a form of appreciation to the gods. They also have the communion theory, and we suggest that sacrifice was a communion between worshippers or a group of people and their gods. Okay, sacrifice began as a form of communion between worshippers and their gods. So it didn't really start off as a form of appreciation, a form of worship. It started as a form of communication, and that is how it has evolved to now. Okay. Now, just as we learned under various concepts we've learned in this course, we also need to understand various key terms. And a sacrifice, we have what we call consecration, where the object of sacrifice has to be sanctified or set apart for the sacred. Okay. In certain cultures, a piece of white cloth is tied about the sacrifice in order for identification. Certain among the Agans, the sacrifice is set aside by raising and lowering the sacrifice. Okay, in the Akan culture, sometimes the fetish priest, the traditional priest, places their hand, on the sacrifice in order to set it aside or consecrate it from there for the god. Then also there's also a form of identification where the offerer or the one offering the sacrifice identifies himself with the sacrifice. Okay, the offerer identifies himself with the sacrifice, and just similar to the accounts among the Mende or Sierra Leone, the offerer lays his hand on the animal in order to create a form of identification between himself and then the sacrifice. Then immolation, to immolate is something to destroy something. Okay, so over here, we are simply referring to how the animal is killed or destroyed. Just as we learned about types of prayer, we're also going to learn about types of sacrifice. Okay, the first one is the propitiatory sacrifice. Propitiatory sacrifice, also known as the appeasement sacrifice. This is where we offer a particular sacrifice to appease the god, to calm the anger of the gods for any wrong done against them. Okay, that's what we call propitiatory sacrifice, where a particular sacrifice is offered to calm the anger of the gods. We also have substitutionary sacrifice. Substitutionary sacrifice, where an animal, for example, is sacrificed to replace a human being. Now, in the past, human sacrifice was very common, but as a result of human rights and modernism, substitutionary sacrifice has become very common, very necessary to avoid the killing of human beings for sacrifice. So, for example, rather than killing a human being, a goat, a sheep, or a cow, can be offered to replace a human being. Then we also have thanksgiving sacrifices. Thanksgiving sacrifice. A sacrifice offered to simply show appreciation to the god for what has been done for them. Okay, simply offered to the gods to show appreciation for something done for them. Then we also have votive sacrifice. Please, whenever you hear votive sacrifice, remember a promise fulfilled. So whenever an individual receives, whenever an individual receives a fulfillment of a promise from the gods, okay, for example, someone may want a child, then go before a god and then say that if you give me a child, I'm going to name the child after you. Or if you give me a child, I'm going to offer the child in sacrifice to your service. Or if you give me a son, I'm going to give such and such portion of my property to you. That is a votive sacrifice. The sacrifice made in fulfillment of a promise made by the gods. Preventive sacrifice. Now, preventive sacrifice is simply a sacrifice done to ward off evil spirits who cause diseases and then mishaps. So, any sacrifice done to protect and ward off evil spirits is called a preventive sacrifice. Now, expiatory sacrifice usually confuses students. Expiatory sacrifice is a sacrifice offered to wipe out a sin committed. Expiatory sacrifice is a sacrifice offered to wipe out a sin committed. Now, this is different from propitiatory sacrifice. For the propitiatory sacrifice, it's offered when a sin has been committed in order to appease the gods. Expiatory sacrifice is simply done to wipe out. It's not all about appeasing the gods, but it's done to guess what? Wipe out. Okay, so let's know the difference between expiatory sacrifice and the propitiatory sacrifice. Integrated sacrifice. This is when covenants are established. Okay, and there are certain ritual practices that either initiate or recant certain covenants we have with the sacred. Now, across the history of many ethnic groups, there are certain instances where certain memories are made, okay, through sacrifices. Some usually during festivals, integrated sacrifices are offered, where particular histories are recanted across history, which form very important timelines in the lives of a particular group of people. Now, what is the importance of sacrifice? What is the importance of sacrifice? Well, sacrifice ensures that there is a form of equilibrium between human beings and then the sacred. Okay, remember, sin disrupts the kind of harmony that should exist between human beings and then their gods. For sacrifice, for example, through propitiatory sacrifice, through expiatory sacrifice, a form of balance is ensured. Then also among human beings ourselves, sacrifice serves as a way of integrating, as a way of bringing us together, bonding us together. Okay, so sacrifices offered during worship, during festivals, bond individuals from a particular town together. The sacrifice also serves as a form of penance for our sins. And once you sacrifice, it signifies regrets, it signifies penance, that appeases the anger of the gods. The sacrifice also embodies or signifies ritual purity. Okay, so sacrifice wipes us of our sins. It makes our souls clean to be able to come before the sacred, seek interventions in various ways and forms. That's the importance of sacrifice. Okay, we have more here. Sacrifice also shows the importance of human life. Human life is sacred. And so through substitutionary sacrifice, we are able to continue to accept the importance of maintaining human life as sacred. Then sacrifice also shows what sin does to society. Okay, therefore, sin is to be punished. However, goodness is to be rewarded. Sacrifice helps us to bring out this distinction between right and wrong, good and bad, etc. Any questions so far before I move to divination as another example of worship? Is there any question about? Okay. So yes.
Sir, please, I want to find out that if sacrifice and prayer is the main element of indigenous African religion when it comes to worship.
I think prayer is the main form of worship. In fact, this is a question that has recurred a number of times, and in some questions in some of the papers I've come across. So it is not prayer and sacrifice, it is prayer. Prayer is the most popular form of worship in African traditional religion. Okay.
All right.
Any other question? Yes. Any other? Good. Let us move to divination. So divination is known as a local form of epistemology. So epistemology is the way of knowing, theory of knowledge. How do we come about information? How do we come about knowledge? Okay, so divination is seen as a local form of knowledge. Okay, divination is the various ways and means in which we can obtain information from the gods. Okay, so we have traditional priests doing that. Okay, traditional priests and the chiefs are seen as the main forms of divination, the main mediums of divination in African traditional religion. Okay, so the traditional priest will consult with the gods, okay, on a particular issue, and then come back with information. For example, your father has died, and as happens in many of our African traditions, no, let me say, a young man has died in the family, a young man of about 35 died in the family, and common to us, we don't understand why you should die young. Therefore, we go to the traditional priest, we go to the what we call the malams to gain information about who killed the young man. Okay, so divination is simply about gaining information. And then I'm giving examples of how divination is used in African traditional religion. Divination is very, very important. Very, very important in African traditional religion. Because last week we learned that African traditional religion, Africans are incurably religious. Therefore, the African brings his or her religion to his way of life. This suggests that before you make any step, you want to be sure that the step you are taking is in agreement with the gods and ancestors, right? Now, how can you be sure that the next step you are taking is in line with the gods and ancestors? Through divination. You need to consult with the gods to be sure that any decisions you make are in line with what the gods want from you. So divination, let me restate again, divination is a very, very important form of worship. It's a very important constituent of worship in the life of the African. Now, the types of divination, divinatory systems. What are the forms of divination we have? Necromancy. This is very popular in African traditional religion. There are people, traditional priests, who can communicate with the dead. So, for example, when someone dies, you can go to the traditional priest. They can conduct certain rituals which will enable them to communicate with the dead person and find out probably what killed him or something. They also have what we call lot casting. This is also very popular in Ghana and Nigeria. We go to the fetish priest. The fetish priest throws a number of cowries on the floor. Okay, and then the pattern of the cowries demonstrate a particular kind of information that you need when you go to the fetish. So throwing of that, lost casting is a way of gaining information from the body. They also have what we call water or mirror gazing. This is also called scrying. Technically, it's called scrying, where you can look into. We have people with the ability to look into water, okay, maybe a basin of water, and then learn information spiritually, or can look into a ball, okay, something like a globe, and then through chance infer information about a particular religion. Now, observation of nature, certain individuals or certain spiritualists are also able to observe nature, and through the pattern of nature, we create certain information. For example, a traditional priest, I keep referring back to French. I'm trying to avoid that thing. A traditional priest can observe rain patterns and see that the gods are angry, and therefore they don't give rain the crops to grow. Okay. My mother used to observe this one. For example, whenever black crows landed on the house. My mother always used to start because she felt that it was a bad omen. Okay, so the presence of vultures in our compound and then on our rooftops also sometimes signifies evil. Okay, or sometimes gives information. And that is what observation of nature entails. Now, what does divination do for us? Divination helps us to understand causation. Helps us to understand why things happen the way they happen. Okay, it helps us understand the things the way they happen. That's what we mean by divination. Helps us understand causation. Then also divination in many ways it gives a form of control. It gives a form of power to human beings to be able to understand how they have to live their lives. So divination in many ways gives power to human beings. For example, to someone control their destiny. Okay. Then this is very interesting. Certain places, divination is used to predict gender of children. Okay, just have to even before birth, the gender of the child and the baby. Then divination helps to bring human beings closer to the sacred by demystifying any lack of communication that exists. Okay, we don't see the sacred. We have most of us don't have contact with them, but through divination, it brings us closer and demystifies any gaps we have in trying to relate the sacred. Now, divination is related to medicine. Divination is related to African traditional medicine, and traditionalists and then herbalists, some herbalists use communicate with the gods in order to know which roots or which stem or which leaf to use in curing particular disease. Okay, so divination forms a very strong part of African traditional medicine. Then also through divination, Africans are able to realize and understand their inefficiencies. Okay, so we need to understand that we are subservient to the sacred. We must depend on the sacred every step of our life. And that divination, or the fact that we use divination to communicate with the gods on a constant basis, is an indication of our insufficiency and our total dependence on the supernatural. So that does it for worship and these forms of worship that we have just described. Are there any questions, please?
Please, my question is in relation to divinity.
In relation to what?
Someone who does. Sir, please, may I get you all?
You said in relation to what, please? I didn't get there.
Divinity.
Divinity or divination, okay.
Okay. Oh, divination, okay. Someone who does that is a diviner.
Exactly, madam.
Their role, please, their role, is it related to soothsaying or a seer, please?
It is very much related. A seer is a diviner. So these are just synonyms. A mediator, a medium, a seer, a prophet. We call them prophets. But that term is not used in African traditional religion. A seer is much more related to the indigenous religions. Okay. So a seer, yes, is a diviner in African traditional religion. Does that answer your question?
Please, yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any other question, please? From all that we've done on the meaning of worship to the definition, the types of prayer as a form of worship, types of prayer, okay, the structure of prayer. This particular session is contains quite a lot of information, but I would strongly encourage you to read the slides in collaboration with the manual. I believe you all have the manual by now. If not printed, you have a soft copy on your phone or your laptop. I hope you've all downloaded it. It's on the page. If you don't have it, I can repost it again after we finish the lecture. You go back to it. Don't depend only on the slides. Of course, I cannot incorporate all the information in the manual in the slides. So the slides only serve as a summary of the major points in the manual. Reading the manual helps you to understand the course much better. Please don't only read the slides and expect that to be enough for your quiz and then your semester. Okay. If there are no questions,
please,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
With respect to the oath,
yeah.
When we per the explanation that you give,
yes, sir.
And then when we relate it to a time when somebody is being initiated into Christian community or Islamic community, where the person goes through baptism or the kalima, the sayings of the kalima,
okay,
for
sir.
the person to be accepted as a Christian or a Muslim. Does that one relate to the two issues that I'm bringing up, like baptism, and then when somebody is also taken through the kalima?
Yeah, so that would be the Christian version of what an oath means in African traditional religion.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Of what an oath is. That is it. Thank you. Okay, any other question? I think today we are moving much faster. We are moving much faster, but we are still trying to address some of the concerns as we move along. Okay, let's move on. A minute here. Let us try to complete Unit 3. Okay, so we are still on worship. Unit 3 is all about worship in African traditional religion. So we are on the 3rd out of the 6 units we have for our course. We are on track. Now, also under worship, we can talk about magic in African traditional religion. Magic in African traditional religion. Now, magic, by definition, is a certain attempt to control or manipulate forces of nature. Okay, magic in African traditional religion is an attempt to manipulate or control forces of nature. Now, let us look at the types of magic. We have what we call homeopathic magic. There's a spelling mistake here. My apologies. It is H-O-M-E-O. Okay, so ignore the O before the E. Homeopathic magic. This form of magic, it works under the assumption that objects that have come into contact with human beings can be used against them. Okay, objects that have come into contact with human beings can be used against them. For example, a piece of hair can be used for good or for evil by traditional priests. Okay, a piece of hair can be taken by someone and can be used for evil against the person. Similarly, a cloth that has come into contact with a human being, so a cloth that has been worn by a person, can be used for good or evil against the person. Okay, that is homeopathic magic. Then we also have what we call sympathetic magic. Now, sympathetic magic is what we refer to as like produces like. Okay, for example, a doll, an effigy of a human being can be made, and certain chants can be chanted, and then as when a sword is when a sword or a pin is used to break any part of the door, it affects the human being. Okay, or for example, you can go to a traditional priest, and the traditional priest would make certain chants, invoke certain words, and then your image will come on a mirror or something. Then you'll be asked to use a knife to strike the image. That which occurs in the spirit, it kills the person physically. Okay, so sympathetic magic, the type of magic which is done in the spiritual realm, but evokes a similar physical response in the spirit. Now, I've given examples to buttress the spirit. Now, uses of magic. The magic is used to cure diseases. Okay, we've given examples of rainmaking. Okay, magic is used to also cause rainfall. Then magic also has bad uses. It can be used to cause diseases. Magic can also be used to harm properties and farm. Now remember that when witches or wizards chant any words to cause harm, it is magic. When witches or wizards use any words to cause harm, it is magic. Therefore, we are understanding magic, the uses of magic in these terms. The magic can be used to cause diseases by witches. The magic can also be used to what? Harm properties and facts. And even life can be used to harm life. Now, medicine also, under worship, we also have what we call medicine and religion. Okay. And when I mention medicine, I'm talking about African traditional. So various definitions that give African traditional religion, but this is the most popular, given by the World Health Organization. It defines African traditional medicine as the sum total of all knowledge and practices, which can be explained or not, and used in diagnosing, preventing, and eliminating a physical, mental, or social equilibrium, and which rely on past experience and handed down from generation to generation, verbally or in writing. This is a very long definition. I've never been good at definitions. So if I was a student, I would try to understand this definition and reproduce it in my own way. But it doesn't mean you don't have to do that too. So this is what African traditional medicine is. Now there's a relationship between medicine and religion. Okay, there's a very strong relationship between medicine and religion. We are still doing worship, and then all that we are doing falls under worship. So medicine and religion falls under worship. So magic plays out in divination. So when you go to the medicine man, when you go to the traditional priest, when you go to the malam, my apologies to the Muslims. Okay, when you go to the in quote malam to seek information, the chants and then the gestures made by the traditional priest or the malam is magic. Okay, so magic is used in divination by traditional priests. Then magic also, herbal knowledge is also derived from through magic. Okay, if you want to find out about how you can cure a particular disease, you can use magic, okay, to identify a particular herb and cure a particular disease. Then, of course, when you are performing any kind of rituals to cure diseases, medicine comes in. Okay, medicine comes into how, religion comes into how medicine is used to cure diseases. Certain rituals have to be performed. For example, for the bone setters who use divination, who use spirits to work, whenever before the leg of the chicken is broken and tied, they make certain rituals to link the chicken to the human being who has a broken leg too. So that when that link is made, while the leg of the chicken is healing, that of the human being is so healing as well. Okay, that is the belief of bone setters. Then also rituals are also performed in many instances before certain plants are used for healing. Okay, certain rituals, certain plants are considered sacred. Therefore, before you cut them, before you use their roots, herbs and stems, before it can be effective, certain rituals have to be used, have to be made before they can be used for healing. Witchcrafts. Okay, witchcraft is also a very pervasive theme under worship, which is in fact in African traditional religion, before as we say in Akan, is one of the most hated concepts. Witches are for females, gender-wise, then wigs are usually used for males. Now the activities of witches are very much hated. Okay, why? Because witches are believed to cause failure in life. Witches are believed to cause failure in life. Witches also inflict sicknesses on people. Witches also are known to cause poor development in society. Okay, so these activities of witches, cause a lot of challenges for the African traditional person. Now, how do we overcome these challenges of witches? How does the African overcome these challenges of witches? We sometimes put ourselves in the care of tutelary deities. Okay, tutelary deities. The tutelary deity is a deity that offers a form of protection for individuals and families and communities. So one way of protecting ourselves against witches is to put ourselves or commit ourselves into the protection of tutelary deities through various rituals. Then we can also use different magical religious objects to protect ourselves against witches. For example, certain people wear certain kinds of rings, certain types of amulets, and other talismans to protect us against witches. Then this third point is very controversial in many communities, especially in the mountain regions and then parts of the water region. Witch camps are used to control witches. I am sure that there are still witch camps in existence, but these are the very large extent spoken against. There are laws against witch camps currently in Ghana now. Now, testing them. You can also curse witches to, as it were, protect human beings against them. I remember I said that during prayer, witches are cursed in the concluding part of a prayer. Okay, so one way by which we can also protect ourselves against witches is to curse them when we pray. Okay, so my dear friends, these are the activities of witches that cause so much challenges for us as African traditional peoples, and these are the ways by which we can protect ourselves against witches. Any questions, please? I think please. Yes, madam.
Sir, my question is on the before we went to witches, good. Please, medicine and then religion.
Yeah.
Please, can somebody be a medicine man and will not be a traditionalist, and will not be an African traditional man? Or can somebody do medicine? Or I don't know how to put it.
So I think I understand what you want to ask.
But can a person be a Christian or a Muslim instead of being a traditionalist, please?
Yes, why not? Because not every herbalist uses spiritual means. Not every herbalist uses or communicates. So knowledge about herbs can be done by anyone, even Christians, even Muslims. So that is your answer. A Christian can use herbs to cure as much as a traditional priest, because a Christian or a Muslim may not communicate with the gods, but will have knowledge passed down by his ancestors on how particular herbs can be used to cure particular diseases. Are you okay?
The reason why I'm asking that is that, say, please, they said that some herbs are there. If you are going to take them, unless you go naked. Some of them are there unless you put money under them. Some of them are there unless you put egg and others. But the question is, are all these not African traditional practices? And if the practitioner, if the medicine man is going to do it that way and says that I am not a traditionalist, what makes the difference between them, please?
That's a good question. That's a good question, because now let's make a distinction here. I'm not sure that every herb requires rituals before they can be used. Okay, so not every herb requires like the kind of rituals you are mentioning, usage of eggs and going naked. It's not every herb that requires those type of rituals. That's one thing. Two, that is what makes our profession of African traditional religion very controversial. Remember, we spoke about membership of the religion. Now, we claim not to belong to the religion, but we continue to use aspects of the religion that speak directly to what an African traditional religious person is. So a Christian will say that, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in ancestors. But we'll go to the village and we'll be instructed by a practitioner to conduct certain ritual before using a particular medicine. Okay, so I wouldn't be able to know how to answer the question because it's neither here or nor there. We are neither African traditional religious people, but we continue to use their medicines. We continue to use their rituals, but not to use their medicines. But does that question what we mean by we are not African traditional religious people? It's a very confusing concept. Any follow-up comments? My dear lady, is there any follow-up contribution? Hello?
Sir, please, I am equally confused. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. So that is how best I can answer. Because our question does not change the situation. It does not change the situation that Africans claim not to be African, not to belong to their religion, but they continue to use certain aspects of their religion, including what you just mentioned. So you will find practitioners who are Christians, but would swear or avoid any association with the African traditional religion. So should we say we are being hypocritical? Should we say we don't have an identity because we don't know what we really are? That is for us to question on our own. Thank you very much for that question. Any other question? Otherwise, we move to festivals.
Doc.
Yes, sir.
Concerning the African traditional healers.
Right.
You said the person might be practicing the herbalist by not belonging to, maybe he doesn't worship the idol or like the deity.
Yes.
I'm saying when we were discussing the definition, you said, I think this is the same under the magic. You said the traditionalists mostly like the bone setters. They will break that. Maybe if you have a broken hand or broken leg, they will break the leg of the chicken,
Right.
and tie it. As the chicken is healing, then the human too, or the patient will also be healing. So, sir, with that, is it not something like mysterious that is beyond the imagination of human? That we will say, oh, this one, there must be an external force, which I might say is relating to the deity or the idol. So I don't think a person might be doing this and then say he doesn't believe in the idol or something, that maybe he's a Muslim or a Christian, because all those that I've seen, they are doing this kind of healing. They are all traditionalists. Like they don't belong to Christian or Muslim. So
Yes.
like,
yeah. So if I understand your question, you are trying to say that, are we not simply just attaching religious understandings to how we use herbs? Is that what your question is? Because without religious understandings, this whole controversy about whether someone who is not a traditionalist can use medicine, it doesn't come in. Is that what your question is?
yes, please.
You understand my question? So in other words, it's just mystery. It's just mythical or mysteries we are attaching to how we use medicine. But we can use medicine without relating to the religious, to the sacred.
Okay.
Is that your question?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Let me answer with this point. Now, there are lots of us who use different types of ointments made from herbal medicine.
Yes.
There are lots of us who, last 2 years, my son was playing on the bed, then he jumped and then developed a fracture. Okay, my wife advised that we shouldn't go to the hospital because when they wear the plaster of Paris, the POP, it sort of changes the makeup of the bone.
Yes.
So you have time to go to the herbalist, the bone setter. When I went to the bone setter, a farmer who had just come back from the farm, he doesn't use any rituals. He went there every evening for about a week. All he did was to massage the bone of my son. And my son is very well now. He's very well, perfect. So my answer to your question is that yes, we have a lot of African traditional medicinal practices that does not directly require any form of ritual to make it effective. So I can develop malaria, I can use neem trees, I can just simply boil trees, I can drink it, or I can sit on it to cure myself of the disease. Does that mean that I'm an African traditional person? No. But the point you're making here is that these are characteristics, these are constituents, these are features of the African traditional religion. And whether you use rituals or not, you are using them. Whether you use rituals or not, whether you use rituals to purify, make it effective or not, you continue to use it. So how would you call that situation? So I think it's a question we cannot answer under this course, but it's a hanging issue that we can always debate about when we are discussing the controversies that surround African traditional religion.
Okay, sir.
Are you okay?
Yes, sir.
So if there are no other questions, can we go to festivals? Any other question? Good. Festivals. Now, festivals are also a very popular, common theme under worship. Festivals, in many ways, consist of sacred time. Remember, we talk about sacred time and particular moments, particular periods of the week which are dedicated to reenacting certain important events in the life of a particular group of people. Festivals are used to show appreciation, but they also used to remember past events. Okay, festivals are used to show appreciation, also used to remember past events. Now, types of festivals. We have moral festivals, we have ritual festivals, and then we have material festivals. Now, when you take your course manual, you'll come across about four. Yes, about four types of festivals. For our purpose, I'll be doing just about two from the slide, and we use that particular way of revision whilst revising the other festivals in the month. Now, the Kwafie Festival, among the notable water region, one of regions, sorry, its purpose is to reenact the defeat of the people of Britain. Okay, the defeat of the people of Britain. Now, for the preparation of the festival, there's first of all communal labor to clear the labor grounds and then prepare the festival. Then the sacred stools and sacred stools, stools which were used by past chiefs are blackened. Okay, in preparation for the festival. That's the material preparation. Then there's also the spiritual preparation. Okay, where there's a consultation with the gods and the foods are offered to the gods and ancestors, the remembrance of past events. We know that food, the offering of food to the gods forms a very important part of most festivals. Okay, for the guns and the homo, the offer to the gods. Okay, so food, the offering of food to the gods forms a very important constituent of sacrifices. Now, what happens on the eve of the festival? On the morning before the festival occurs, people gather at the palace to listen to traditional music. Then on a Friday, the chiefs and sub-chiefs engage with the blacking stools, which is done during the material preparation. Okay. Then there's also a pilgrimage to the Royal Museum of the Passive that forms a part of the festival, where the indigents make a trip to the Passive, where there's a Royal Museum. Then there's also a Grand Durbar. Okay, there's a Grand Durbar of the chiefs and people. And this Durbar, dignitaries are invited, and the development projects are also discussed. Also at this festival, we have what we call the Esumu Nefuka rites. Now the Esumu is the purification of the stools of the dead chiefs. This is done in the material preparation. And the Nefuka rites is done on the late after Friday night. And this is where a raffia waistband is tied around the waist of the chief. Now, to conclude these festivals, the royal stools, the blacking stools are fed, and food is given to the stools. Then, as part of it, there's no church on Sunday. Then, finally, libation for the point of libation brings an end to the festival. Apologies for the noise. Just behind my house, there is a popular road, and this sometimes causes a lot of things. So, so I'm just looking at one example of festivals, the Kwafie Festival. We looked at the material preparation, the spiritual preparation. Okay, please use this format to revise the other types of festivals you have in your course manual. Now, the importance of festivals. What are the importance of festivals? Festivals serve as a point of contact for remembering our culture and history. It's also used to give thanks to the supreme being, gods and ancestors. During festivals, like I said, important dignitaries, usually political appointees, are invited, and then this facilitates political promises and initiates political projects. Then during festivals, it also serves as an occasion for chiefs and traditional priests to assert their power, okay, or renew their authority over the people, okay. Then festivals also present a lot of social importance because family members from far and wide who have not been home for a long time come to celebrate and then discuss issues, pending issues, and also offer forms of development within families, within the community, and within the town as a whole. Then during festivals, there's a lot of education for the insider, for the native itself, and for the outsider, the foreigner, on aspects of the culture, and helps to understand the culture much better. And with that, we conclude Unit 3. So today we've done a lot. We've looked at sources of African traditional religion, primary, secondary sources. We've looked at what they said, look at the challenges, we look at how secondary sources came about, and we also look at the challenges of using both primary and secondary sources. Then we've also looked at worship. What do we mean by worship? We've broken down the various forms of worship and then the importance also has for African traditional religious faith. Are there any questions, please? Is there any question, please? Okay, so let us do a quick introduction of Unit 4. Okay, we are meeting for 2 more times. I don't also want to rush over the course content. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to do a very brief introduction of Unit 4, and then we end earlier today. Then next week, Saturday, God willing, we continue with Unit 4. Let me share the slide for Unit 4. Okay, so in Unit 4, we will look at 3 particular aspects. We're going to look at rites of passage, which we are mostly familiar with. Then we look at the concept of sin and how sin is removed in African traditional religion. So in Unit 4, we look at rites of passage, the various rites of passage examples. Then we look at sin and how sin is removed in African traditional religion. So I don't also want to start with the slides. So rites of passage. Once again, sorry for the noise. The rites of passage simply deals with rituals which mark important transitions in our lives. Now, everyone is born, everyone attains puberty, everyone most of us will marry, and all of us will die. So, childbirth, naming ceremony, attainment of puberty, or transition into adulthood, marriage, and then death. And these 4 turning points of our lives are marked by various rituals. This is what we call rites of passage. Okay, so rites of passage consists of rituals that marks the various turning points, the various transitions in the lives of the individual. Okay, we have 3 types of 3 phases of rites of passage. We have the, what we call, the, 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 preliminary phase or the incorporation phase, where individuals are ushered into a new being. We have the liminal phase, where some individuals don't have any status, but are being prepared to enter into a new state. Then we have the reincorporation phase, the post-liminal, where individuals re-enter into a new phase. I'll end here. We've done 2 units today. Like I said, I don't want us to move too fast. Let us reserve. Let us reserve unit 4 and its content for next week. But I also wait behind. Are there any questions you have for me? Or not that we Is there any question you have for me or not that we can today? Okay. So if there are no questions, then we can end the class for today. I suggested I gave the opportunity for all of us to communicate through WhatsApp, or you can call me if there's something you don't understand. Whatever we do over here, okay. Then I also showed that I also indicated that my name is indicated as EEO on our WhatsApp page, so you can text or call if you need any clarity on all that we are doing in this course. All right. Thank you very much for the usual interactions. Again, I wish you a Merry Christmas. And see you in the new year.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Same to you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Dabe na bebe sunyai.
Hey, she never watch it.
And there's our best right. I'm really be a so baby. I know my eye was sunyano. Yeah, way.
That's it.
Yeah.
Good.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
Say.
Yes, madam.
Say. Me pass so menka group no. Masendo me number nti fa make me so fa make am.
Nothing.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Hey, Aggie.
Yes,
number can home.
with you.
Yeah, also
A group on one share link in it. Because a group where you can.
Agnes, special link now, man. Why?
Me pass you.